Welcome back to the Assertive Podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. Today, we are continuing our series of emotions. We are looking at guilt, and we're going to be reading a post titled, Am I the Asshole for Feeling Guilty About This? I'm 15 years old. My mother went and picked up my check today for me while I was still at school, which was unexpected, but I was grateful for. She texted me to inform me she picked up my paycheck and then proceeds to ask me to buy dinner. Now, my mom and I have a pretty laid-back relationship, and we're always joking around, so I responded, "What?" with 2 broken heart emojis, thinking we were both playing around. And then I went ahead and asked, "Do you want sushi?" because that's what I wanted. All of a sudden, her whole mood changes, and she says, "Damn, I'll buy my own dinner." I'm trying to set my own boundaries with her, so I say, "I was just joking, but I only want to spend $100 on food because there's something I'd really like to buy." She responds with, "Yeah, you always hit me with the what and dangs when I ask for food. I won't ever ask again. See you later." Now, 2 days ago, I did let her borrow $125 to buy my sister's clothes, and I then bought dinner for everybody, which cost another $50. And 3 days before that, I spent $150 on Red Lobster for my mom and one of her friends who wasn't even there. I don't understand why she's acting like this when I never said no, and I even offered up the money that I had just gotten to buy my food. Anytime I don't want to spend money on her, she finds a way to make me feel guilty. They added an edit. She also went ahead and just bought food with my money, even after saying she wasn't going to ask me again to buy food for her. Am I the asshole? Oh, this poor 15-year-old.
Oh, I mean, she's making it rain up at Red Lobster. I love me some Red Lobster.
First off, I'm just very curious what kind of job she is doing that in a week period. She did $125 for clothes, another $50 for dinner. We had another $50 on Red Lobster, but it almost sounds like mom's kind of spending your whole check there, depending on how much you're getting paid and how many hours you're working.
No kidding. Yeah, 15, you're probably making, minimum wage or just above it. Even if you're working full time, you're not going to make a ton of money. You're still in school. Wow.
Yeah.
Mom's making it rain up in there.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh. Yeah, so this is a good one. So the author is feeling some guilt. It sounds like mom's doing a pretty good job at poking some of the buttons there to get her
absolutely
to bank food, huh?
Yeah.
Dang. So take us away, introduce guilt, what's the function of it, all those good stuff.
Absolutely. Guilt is one of our de-energizing emotions. This is one that's pretty uncomfortable for us to feel. We are typically engaging in a lot of avoidance factors for it. Mm-hmm. That said, guilt is very healthy and we do need it. So guilt is giving us the data that we are breaking other people's rules. Mm-hmm. These are usually going to be larger groups or entities. So family of origins, which is what we're seeing in this post. You would have like religious norms, cultural norms. You would have, if you're in a workplace, there are probably workplace norms as well. And a lot of these are going to be interrelated, right? So different countries have different workplace norms.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a meme that goes around and it says, Americans out of office. And it's, "I'm going out for like heart surgery. I will be available by email and I will respond within 24 hours. And then it's like European, "I will be gone for the summer. I will respond to everything in September."
I gotta move, man. I'm making some bad decisions here. Yeah. So we're participating in all these different systems that we live in, if we violate one of the norms or the rules in that system, guilt is the emotional consequence of that.
Yeah, and it's an appropriate emotion. And what we get by complying with these norms is we get the safety that comes with these systems. So we get the safety of our family. If we go back, early human civilizations were very collective. And so we did rely on each other probably more than we really do today, or that we want to admit to, relying on each other today. And so the value system there was thinking about the good of everybody. And you kind of think of yourself last, where I think today we are more individualistic. We tend to think of ourselves first and the good of everybody else second. Now, that's kind of a blanket statement. I know that's not true for everybody, but as a whole, that's kind of the mindset of societies at this time.
Yeah.
And so the data that we get keeps us within the protection of our various systems that we are a part of, and it keeps us within compliance. Too little guilt, we tend to offend. So this could be criminal offenses. This could just be etiquette offenses, where we're just saying things off the cuff and being rude inappropriately, or making inappropriate comments. Times where I think it's appropriate to break with your system norms would be if it does not also align with your personal value system.
Yeah.
So typically, the bigger systems that we are in do influence our own internal value systems. This is why guilt and shame often travel together, because if we're breaking, a religious norm or societal norm, we're probably also breaking one of our personal norms that we've established for ourselves. Examples I usually give my clients for times where that may be appropriate, I think back to Underground Railroad or hiding Jews during the Holocaust. We were breaking with societal norms and laws there, so we were technically offending and engaging in illegal activity. But those individuals were probably not feeling a lot of heavy guilt, and they were not feeling shame because they were sticking true to their internal value system. And so that kind of trumped that.
I guess like probably change in general, or like revolution in general, has to be quite countercultural, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So you use offender for too little. I typically use antisocial. Again, this is not to be confused with introverts. The actual clinical definition, against social societies. So we're literally going against society. So these individuals may be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. So then on the flip side, too much guilt, I tend to use over-responsible as the descriptor with my clients. I don't necessarily know if I have examples of when it may be appropriate to be over guilty.
I think sometimes, I don't know if I think sometimes it's a natural overcorrection, like especially, I think, talking about criminogenic offenders, or maybe even people early in sobriety, feeling a lot of remorse, maybe for the people they have harmed. So sometimes there can be an overly disregard of self as a way to like repair relationships, I think sometimes too. I don't know that that's necessarily an appropriate, that's not an ideal way to do it, but I think it can be a natural overcorrection. And I mean, obviously there's times where, I'm thinking of like a mother and a baby, right? Like that baby is not going to be able to participate. So there's going to be times in which you will legitimately have to take on more responsibility in a relationship, which again, when it's to the point where you're not caring for self, that's a problem. But there are times where that naturally is just how a relationship plays out sometimes.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Codependency, I think, is a maladaptive, what that could look like, a maladaptive, like excessive guilt, codependency.
Yeah. I think it's important maybe for us to distinguish, there probably are some cultural nuances where collective cultures are still probably valuing over responsibility.
For sure.
Balance guilt.
Mhm.
So this is not to say go out there and fight against norms
Yeah,
and
just like do
create
your numbers.
problems for you. Yeah. But there may be a way for you to find a healthy balance where you're taking care of the collective and taking care of yourself. And we use the phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Mhm.
And so there are times where taking care of yourself is actually going to benefit the collective.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think this comes up a lot. I have, like first generation clients whose
mhm.
countries where clients come from, and it is like very still collective. The family comes first kinds of
Yep.
things, or where individualism is seen as problematic. So you got to be aware of stuff like that. But
Yeah.
and what would be, and we're using the word guilt, what would be some other like synonyms that you would use if a client maybe doesn't use that word often?
Mm. Remorse,
Mm.
contrite, judged. If you think about court of law, you are judged guilty or not guilty.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're feeling judged or critiqued, you may be experiencing some guilt. Again, guilt and shame are often very interrelated. So some of these are hard to kind of parse out a bit.
Yeah. I think like
Um,
remorse, regret would probably be the main ones I would use.
Just think about like blame or blameless would be like the too little.
Mm-hmm.
So I think kind of that victim stancing where we're not taking any responsibility.
Yeah. When there is
Um,
there should be appropriate guilt. You should feel guilty, but you don't. That's
yes.
problematic. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Along that lines would be maybe like when we're thinking synonyms for healthy guilt, accountability is
Mm-hmm.
maybe like an action or a verb that would go along with that emotion.
Yeah.
If we are feeling guilt, we should then be prompted to take some accountability with that, whether that looks like changing our behavior and apologizing, or maybe it's just an apology.
Yeah. I think that's hard. Like, and you and I have worked with offenders. I think it's if somebody is naturally leaning towards low guilt, they don't want to be willing to like increase guilt because guilt's an uncomfortable thing to experience. And you really, sometimes when I was working with clients, I'd be like, hey, the only real benefit at this point I think that you're going to find from feeling guilty is that if you feel guilty enough, you won't end up back in jail. I don't think that we're naturally empathetic enough to like change our relationships or all of our behavior. But if you don't want to get caught, you have to have a little bit of guilt to self-regulate.
Yeah. Motivational interviewing, finding that lowest common denominator of goals.
Yeah, that's right. When you think of guilt, this is hard for clients sometimes to like, where do you notice it in your body if you've done something that you know is wrong?
I feel it in my gut.
Yeah.
I usually feel it in my chest, like I'll get heavy-hearted a little bit, almost kind of like pain. I think of like disappointment. So that's maybe like tying in with that shame because I'm ashamed of myself as well. But
Yeah.
then I get this kind of instinct to like curl in and kind of go into this protective pose and like fetal position.
Yeah, like suck me into the ground kind of
Yeah,
sensation.
like I'm ready to like hide away. Please don't look at me.
I know. Yeah, it's just like wanting to just like evaporate and yeah. It is like a very pulling. It's like gravity increases or something when you're feeling really guilty. You feel heavy and lethargic or just to isolate, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also, sometimes I notice if I feel guilty, I'll respond with like anger sometimes or even blaming because I don't like to feel guilty. So then I'll be mad that somebody else is holding me accountable. And I don't like the feeling of that sometimes. Sometimes it's either another buddy emotion or I'll start kind of mentally
Yeah.
pointing fingers of why I'm not wrong. I notice myself
Mm-hmm.
doing that internally. Mm-hmm.
Would that mean you lean towards too little guilt? We're
It
kind of taking the
probably
victim stance there.
Yeah, I was trying to think. It probably depends on the situation. Because I think probably if my first impulse is to get defensive, meaning that I feel somebody's like maybe attacking me, I will definitely
Fair.
lean towards like not guilt. Um, But if I know that I've done something wrong, sometimes I mean, for years and years, like punish myself with being overly guilty. So it kind of just depends, I think, with what the offense is, how I lean, you know? What about
Yeah.
you? Are you inclined towards one end of that spectrum?
I think I lean towards over responsible,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of times just looks like difficulty saying no. So it kind of ties in with some of the passivity from anger, which kind of matches because if you lean towards, in the instances you lean towards too little guilt, you're aligning with the aggressive end of anger.
Yeah, and I'm definitely known for like kind of doing my own thing, you know. So I probably am a little bit more willing to disrupt some norms, maybe. Mostly think like in my family of origin, you know, like if we're having like a big family get together, I'm like, bye, I'm going to do what I want because I'm really taking too long. See ya. And people kind of know that I'm working that way, but yeah, I think if I like hurt somebody, I definitely carry that with me. You know, that's
Mm-hmm.
usually I'm not one to like really have regrets in life, but I'll regret it if I've hurt somebody. That's something that I'll wish I've not done. Yeah. Something that comes up a lot is the idea of like inappropriate versus appropriate guilt. And I think
Mm-hmm.
me and you as therapists, we're always kind of fielding because we don't, you know, guilt is a good emotion to have. Like we talked about, we need to have it. It keeps us in agreement with society. So, you know, fielding for inappropriate guilt, how do you help clients discern whether or not they should be feeling guilty?
Mm-hmm. I take it back to locus of control, which we touched on a bit in anxiety 1. And we touched on it a little bit in anxiety part 2 as well. So if it is a behavior that was within our control and we did not do that behavior appropriately,
Mm-hmm.
and we are feeling guilt, that is appropriate guilt. If we did everything within our control, quote unquote, correct,
Okay.
and the outcome was still undesirable, and we're feeling guilty about that, that is inappropriate guilt because we controlled everything we could that was within our control. So if we're feeling guilty that something didn't work out the way we wanted, chances are it was due to factors outside of our control.
So that would be a matter of like, did you have good intentions and
Mm-hmm.
was like your effort the best it could be?
Yeah.
How you're saying. Okay. So if they said, yes, I had good intentions and yes, this was my best, it still didn't go great. You're saying, well, that's outcome focused. That doesn't change that you did your best there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see this a lot because I tend to work with more of the passive and people pleasers where they adjust their behavior to manage other people's emotional responses.
Yeah.
So it's, I can't say no because then they'll be mad at me, or I can't say no because they'll be disappointed. That's okay if they're disappointed. That's an appropriate emotion. I bet they can tolerate that.
Mm-hmm.
You're not setting boundaries because you will feel guilty. That guilt is inappropriate. You don't have to feel guilty for that.
So that anybody who has a quote unquote negative emotion, that's seen as almost inflicting that on them. By them not having outcomes that they want, we take ownership of that.
Correct. Yeah. Versus it just simply being an appropriate emotional response. If somebody said something that hurt your feelings, you have the right to tell them they hurt your feelings. The appropriate emotional response they should have to that is they should feel some guilt. So you not telling them they hurt your feelings because you don't want to make them feel bad, you're not helping them progress. You're not helping them conform within the norms of the friendship. You're essentially writing the norms of you can be treated poorly. And we say this all the time on here. Boundaries is teaching people how to treat you. So when we are not asserting ourselves, we're creating these new norms that this is okay to treat me like this because I would rather be treated terribly than for you to feel appropriate guilt when you hurt my feelings.
We talk about rules. There's got to be some kind of rule of like, I can handle emotions better than others. There's got to be some kind of belief, right? Like
More belief in there.
Yeah, that like it'd be better for me to have my feelings hurt than for somebody else to feel guilty. And that's a curious way to think about other people's emotions.
Yeah. It's like a weird mix between martyrdom, but also grandiosity.
I'm the best at sacrificing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there are also
Yeah.
some norms where that's also the narrative. So I have a
Mm,
client who's separating from the Catholic faith, and a large narrative in that is you suffer on earth
mhm.
and you get rewarded in heaven in accordance with your suffering on earth. So it's almost more beneficial to go out and look for suffering or to tolerate suffering, because then you get rewarded, versus being able to say it's okay for me to assert my
Mm.
rights, and this isn't necessarily suffering that God wants me to take on. He's not maybe expecting this of me.
You're almost saying it's almost kind of like transactional that, okay, well, if there's kind of this celestial balance. Well, okay, if you have some kind of suffering, you're rewarded proportionally in blessings or something kind of like that.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever heard a client say, I'm a recovering Catholic? People say that. Yeah. Like the Catholic guilt is like a real thing, you know? Yeah. And we talked about it on the show too. I think even like mom guilt is a
Yeah.
thing. And I noticed this the most with screen time and parents knowing it's a helpful tool at times, but then feeling really guilty if they use it. And so I was asked the question of like, who's made this rule? Like who's decided, okay, well, it's social media or it's research. And I think it's helpful to limit, but it's just like a tool, like anything else. There's a time and a place for it. And so I think if every time that you're letting your kid watch Bluey, you're having this like, eternal torturing of yourself, like, God, let's check what rules we're adopting here,
Absolutely.
It's really functional.
And I think there's space for, we'll talk about this more in shame, for a little bit of compassion and mental flexibility with the rules. Whereas Bluey does have some educational purposes. They do a lot of like emotional intelligence training in that.
Yeah. Again, it's just like demonizing it, saying like this one thing. There's very few things in life that are all good or all bad.
Yeah.
I think there's time and a place. And so I think if you're noticing a lot of these like rigidities, that's probably indicative of some inappropriate guilt or you've adopted some rules that aren't really serving you anymore. And I think in the post, the mom is really good at, something like, I don't even ask you again, then just forget about it. I'll see you later. And that she's kind of like creating that distance, and then it's up to the author to close the gap and to the resolution to the conflict is for her to give in and to buy her mom Red Lobster.
Yeah. Really what I'm hearing is there's a rule or a narrative that your paycheck is our paycheck.
Yeah.
Which really limits the comfortability the author feels with then setting boundaries.
Especially she's 15. I can't imagine she's been getting paychecks for too long. So if her mom pretty quickly was like, oh, this is our money, this is collectively our money, that's probably a new thing that's come up for them that they haven't really figured out how to navigate yet. That's funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it's like, I've never seen moms get so crabby because their kid won't buy them sushi. Mom sounds a little immature, I think, in this.
This is a pretty good example of emotional immaturity in parents. And so I do a lot of work with adults who grew up with emotional immaturity. This kid is figuring it out at 15 and trying to set boundaries, where I have clients in their 30s up to their like 50s and 60s who are still working to set boundaries with parents, especially as they transition into like a caretaker role with the parent. And there's this new power dynamic. So we're seeing it in the post, teenagers, but this is something clients will experience this at different developmental stages throughout their life as well, if it's not established early.
Yeah. It's resource allocation. Like you said, there might be different family norms where it is more collective, on pulling and kind of like sharing those things. Again, I think there's more gentle ways for mom to ask. She's basically asking for money, right? So there's different ways to go about that instead of acting entitled to somebody's resources.
Yes.
And I think I think mom picked up the paycheck as a favor, but weaponized it to say, now you owe me. Now, because I picked up this paycheck, you owe me the money that's on this paycheck. And I think, if you're finding somebody is really doing a lot of transactional acts of kindness in your relationship, you're probably being manipulated, you know?
To me, I don't think she was picking it up as a kindness. I think she was picking it up because she needed the money. So she needed to go get your check.
Yeah.
And you were at school and she needed your money. Again, we get limited information with these posts, so we don't necessarily want to shame too much, but we're just kind of going off the details that we have, keeping in mind this is the narrative of 15-year-old. But from this, it does seem this was completely self-serving. There wasn't kindness in this act at all.
And I think it's almost like the author is leaning as over responsible, too much guilt. And I think mom's almost kind of going the other way, where not enough guilt, to where she's, I say, the clinical term antisocial, I say it's basically clinical selfishness. You you kind of step on the toes of other people to get your own needs met. And I think if mom had a little bit more respect, she would feel appropriate guilt that would help her be a little bit more respectful of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of, naturally kind of talked about this just in how we each respond to guilt, but there's definitely this participation between like guilt and anger. And lots of times I think we can find ourselves in relationships where there's kind of this cycle that goes on. Talk to us about that guilt anger cycle.
Yes, I love the guilt anger cycle. We did a lot of this when we worked with probationers.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's a cycle. So imagine this is in a circle. We have our instigating event, and that's usually responded to with anger. So either we tend to be aggressive by nature, that's the way we tend to lean, or we're more passive and we've hit our breaking point and now we're at our exploding doormat portion.
Yeah.
So either way, we typically are starting the guilt anger if we're looking at it maybe like a clock at 12 o'clock. We have our instigating event, which is our expression of anger. Then after we've yelled and said all of the horrible things, we start to feel really guilty about that. We tend to avoid. This could look like ignoring that this happened. This could be some gaslighting or saying like, I didn't say that, you misinterpreted that. This could just be kind of walking on eggshells as well, and kind of tiptoeing around that person. Eventually, we start to feel resentful that we now have to do all of these avoidance techniques. So the anger is starting to build back up until we get to a portion of expression again.
Yeah.
And so if nowhere in there are we using adaptive coping skills, the cycle is just going to keep going.
Yeah. So somebody explodes. It's this horrific fight. Then the person who explodes says, "Oh, I'm kind of a dick for saying all that. I need to be nice for a little bit because I really overreacted there." So then the person who maybe was the receiver of all that rage now feels a little bit vindicated, where they get to kind of poke at the person who exploded, because they said, you don't have any right to explode because you've already kind of fucked up. So now I'm in a power position to where I'm the person who's justified in our argument. So the person who now exploded is walking on eggshells more because they feel guilty that they exploded. That resentment starts to build because they feel like they're stuffing things. And now
they're kind of getting punished.
They're getting punished by the person who they've kind of reacted against. And now this cycle has continued because they explode again. And they get stuck there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see that. I mean, I'm sure most therapists would say I see that a lot with domestic violence, and I see that with substance use a lot. Yeah. Do you deal with, I'm sure on your caseload, you deal with more of the exploding doormat types who kind of stuff and then blow up?
Yep. So I do see this also.
Yeah.
Without the use of substance use or criminogenics at play.
Yeah, just from the natural kind of way that their anger works, it participates in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when somebody's kind of stuck in this guilt anger cycle, where do you feel like the point? Do you feel like the anger needs to get addressed, the guilt, the resentment? Like, what's the way to start pulling out of this?
With my caseload, I try to get them to express it prior to the anger. And so we tend to start with the preceding guilt. So the guilt that's stopping them from speaking up on their needs, or the guilt that's stopping them from being assertive.
Yeah.
And I'll usually start there with them. If we're maybe struggling to make progress there, then where I attempt to have them intervene is after the explosion. Instead of kind of going into that guilt retreat, take the accountability there. Go back to your partner and say, I did not handle that very well. What I was feeling in this moment was this buildup of 6 weeks. You've been asking me, like, what our kids' soccer schedule is, and it's on the fridge, it's in your email, and every single week you ask me this, and I have to take time out of my day to go look up information that I've sent you and made available to you.
Mm-hmm. I'm irritated just thinking of this imaginary story.
And so it's okay. We did not handle that well in the moment. We really struggled to assert our needs and set the boundary when they're asking the question instead of going to find the answer and stopping your day. Asserting the need would be, that's in your email. I sent that to you in your email, or it's on the fridge. You can check it when you get home. I don't have time to go find that at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we just kind of shut that down. If you don't feel appropriate doing that, you're going to need to have that expectation. You're probably going to explode on your partner. And then you got to come back and take some accountability and try and tell them after the fact when you actually feel probably worse. I think the guilt after the explosion feels heavier than the guilt of just not asserting my needs. But
for sure.
So both times I attempt to get them to do it in the guilt. I did have a client do okay with the anger. They